So welcome to our webinar today, where I'm joined by Robert Manson. And Robert is a health and safety and wellbeing specialist with over 30 years experience in managing and delivering health and wellbeing and health and safety within organizations. Most of his career has been in pharmaceutical business with GSK, the food retail market with Morrisons, and the energy sector with RWE. So the webinar today will last for about 45 to 50 minutes and is the second session in a three-part webinar series to coincide with Stress Awareness Month and Mental Health Awareness Month in May. So today, Robert's going to be talking about developing personal resilience, looking at the tools we can use to develop personal resilience, and exploring the impact on organizations and individuals where resilience has not been developed, as well as, where it has been developed, and as well as what can happen if it isn't developed. So I think now what I'll do is hand over to Robert, and he can start his slides. So there we go. Right.
Thank you, Stuart.
So, okay, over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Just want to check in. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes. Yeah, see the screen fine.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm going to just go through this topic of what developing personal resilience, as Stuart mentioned. It's probably my own take of it, and also based on evidence and best practice. So I'll throw in a few models that you may or may not be familiar with, but I want to make it practical, and I want to make it kind of, real is what I want to say. So let's, what we're going to cover, the impacts on personal resilience for people and businesses and across the world right now. We're going to cover what is personal resilience, and there's different definitions on that, and I'll share that a bit more. Some traits of what makes resilient people, the benefits to an organization, and what will impact and enable people and also disable people, I should say, as well, for not getting it right. And then some top tips, practical tips. So it's an awareness session, really. And I'll pull out some bits that I think particularly important that you might want to take away, and then maybe come back to going for a bit more detail. So thanks for that. Well, what's happening right now? I think it's, every year we have different challenges. Here are a few that are currently impacting when I talk to people in the businesses, what's impacting them, what's worrying them, keeping awake at night. Cost of living crisis, people having to choose between heating and eating. Really food banks on the increase. So real people financial crisis right now across the world. Obviously Russia and Ukraine haven't helped on that. But again, when you switch the news on, it doesn't really fill you with lots of positiveness at the moment, and it's a lot of problems that's occurring. Climate change, another issue, people are really concerned about, and also what we're seeing is that stress levels are not really going down; they're actually going up. And recently, even yesterday, you can see reports about long-term sickness absence gone up like it's never done before. So we're not getting it quite right out there, and people are suffering, and actually their resilience is being impacted. And of course, people are actually closing companies out. BT announced 55,000 redundancies at the end of the decade. It goes on and on. So there's a lot going on. So it depends what lens we see this, but it is impacting. It can impact our personal resilience if we choose it to be, and I think that's an important word. So, what's the definition? Well, I've pulled out a couple. And there are, as I said, there's lots of different definitions. So let me go through the couple I think are probably really most accurate for me anyway, and across businesses in my experience. So it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, or threats to give it all sources of stress. These can be family relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace or financial stresses. So this definition from American Psychological Association is really quite all-encompassing. It doesn't differentiate between workplace and home. It's the whole person comes to work. And then West earlier found that really, and this is probably what more people think about resilience, is they found that resilience is the capacity to bounce back from failure, setbacks, conflicts, or any other threat to well-being that they may experience. You might think like this bounce back. What it isn't is being thick-skinned and hard and just soldiering on through. That's not a definition of resilience. And if people are using that, then they're wrong. So here are two that I think you may or may not be familiar with that I want to share with you that I think reflect what resilience is all about. it isn't just about bounce back ability, people call it, but it's that recovery, but it's also preparing for the setback as well, which is people miss that point about what personal is all about. It's a set of skills, you can learn it. Some people are born more resilient than others, but actually there's some tips and techniques that you can pick up to benefit you and your organization. So what are these traits? Now, these, I want to say, these are what I found from the evidence and research and commonly found. If you talk about resilient people, what does it really mean? Well, they're realistically optimistic. I mean, basically, they don't walk around with rose-tinted glasses, but they say, well, okay, what's the positives in this? And actually, we know it's not perfect, but what can we do about it? That optimistic view. Emotionally self-aware, really controlling their emotions, their anger or their fear, but actually being aware of others as well. Solution focused, they don't just panic and say it's all going wrong. You know, we've got all these problems, but what's can we do about it? What solutions are in our control that we can make a difference on? Learn from mistakes. Having not blaming others, but actually saying, well, actually, let's all sit back and think, what can we learn from this? You know, most inventions are learned by lots of errors. So isn't people really good at learning from mistakes? Internal focus on control, I hinted on that area. That's particularly in COVID, we say it's all happening. What can we do about it? Well, what you can do is wear your mask, wash your hands, you know, keep your social distances. That's within your control. And I think resilient people are very good at that, saying, well, what I can't control what's happening all everywhere, but what I can control is even my own attitudes to a situation. I can control that within me. That locus control is pretty high. They're very good at integrating demands of work and life. What that means is they might work overtime or work later, but they can recover from that and actually good at managing that integration between work and home, hybrid working. They're very disciplined. They're kind of making sure that's no one suffers and themselves and their family suffer from that. That's generally a good discipline of resilience people. Value social support, but they like being in teams. They like that social support. They can connect with others. They learn from others. They probably tend to have more feedback and mentorship than other people because they're keen to develop and not be fearful of or not worried about kind of competition. They just want to share that and make sure they get that social support. Perseverance, they tend to see things to the end. They don't give up and say, oh, it's all too much. They say, well, let's keep going. Let's change tact, whatever it is needs to do, but let's keep on the goal. They're very good at reaching their targets. And then also keeping high energy of level, motivation, esteem, morale. They're really pretty good at that kind of thing. Now that's an ideal situation, of course, and we're not all doing that. But you might want to think, is there any others that you might think that's missing from this trait? I'll just pause a second there. Does anyone want to comment in the box or Stuart, I'll open it up for a
So just while see if there are any questions, I know looking at this at times, I'm not the most resilient of people. So I flipped this on this head and sort of thought about my own weakness. And I suppose it's about dwelling on things. So that's one of the issues that I have in terms of my resilience is that I can't let things just wash away. I end up dwelling on things for a couple of days and that sort of impacts my resilience. So that would be something personally that I find, a trait of resilient people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Stuart. And I tend to do that myself. You know, we're our own worst critic. What resilient people focus on what's going right, what's going wrong. They tend to cut off. Say, well, that's happened now, so let's bounce back. Let's bounce back quickly. Sometimes maybe you and I do, but we take a little bit slower to bounce back. But that's all right. You know, it's okay to be that. We're all human beings. We're all, you know, there's no perfect things. But these are just some examples. But you might want to add some more onto that. You know, but I don't want to put thick skin, tough, hard. All that stuff is nonsense. That macho culture is gone. I think resilient people, male and female, at work, these are some very good, positive behaviours and attitudes that they'll have. So if you think about anything, write it down or put it in the chat. I'd be interested to hear from you. As I say, these are just some common examples. So what does it benefit? Why bother being resilient? Well, companies actually want to recruit resilient people. And why is that? Well, across the evidence is they are healthier. mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, they've got their stuff together, and they tend to be quite focused, disciplined, and generally healthy. Look after themselves, look after others. This I mentioned about integration of work life. That's really good, but they do it in the teams as well. So managers who are resilient managers actually make sure they cast a shadow that people don't just throw the job demands out. They actually don't make sure their team has a healthy work-life integration or balance. They actually put in discretionary effort. They'll go the extra minute or extra mile, whatever happens, the extra hour, because they're committed. But they make sure they get the time back generally. So what I'm saying here is it's all right, but discretionary effort, but it's also shared discretionary effort. It's they get the time back if they put more in it. But actually, that also happens in their teams as well if they're managers. High levels of performance. Well, if you're very focused, target driven, you are going to have high levels of performance, but you take yourself and your team through it. And I call it, it's a healthy high performance that no one suffers reach those targets. It's not about burning people out. It's about making sure everyone's in place doing the right things at the right time. Reduced errors and accidents. If you're very focused, disciplined, driven, and actually very emotionally aware, you actually care about your employees and actually care about yourself. So you take care in terms of what you do. That's quality or it's accidents or incidents. So that if they're emotionally aware what's going around with them, then actually they're most intelligent. Then they will make sure things are in place. And generally, teams that are resilient have less incidents and accidents and errors. Enhanced efficiency goes on. They don't waste time. They make sure that things are efficient, that meetings don't drag on for hours. Say, right, okay, we achieved. That's late. Let's end the meeting. Or do we need to have a meeting in the first place? So they're quite disciplined in terms of not wasting time, because actually that's impact on them and their team. Attract the best talent. I mentioned that employers want resilient people. Of course, they put a job advert there, but they don't want to bring people in to burn them out. It costs a lot of money. So we want to make sure people are if they've got these talents and attributes, then actually they look for people like that, because they want to create a culture where we've got a resilient people, resilient teams, resilient culture. And then finally, those people, if you've got a low accident error rate, you've got high levels of performance, you've got healthy employees, your value of your brand is going to shoot up. This is a company that people want to work for, because it's making sure that everything's in place, that they are really developing people's resilience and make sure they're equipped for hard times ahead, and also supported to recover. I just want to pause there. Is there anything else that you might want to add into that you think is important for having benefits resilience? Stuart, anything from your end?
Yes, I was going to say, I suppose it sort of links in with the attracting the best talent and keeping the best talent. Would be, the benefits of having personal resilience of yourself and within a business is that, and that valued corporate brand is that you end up sort of keeping staff, retaining staff. So I think that's a hidden cost that a lot of companies don't always appreciate, that, having to, the loss of knowledge and the cost of recruitment and training. So, we can build those resilient companies and keep those people, our staff, resilient, then they're going to stay.
That's an excellent point, and actually, you're absolutely right. So recruitment should be recruitment and retention. I think that's the important point. It costs probably 3-4 times much more money to actually replace somebody. But also, if your people are go off because they created a culture where it's not resilient around and not supportive, then they're not going to take time to recover. But also, those teams are going to be put under pressure, and it's going to impact their resilience as well. So when numbers go down, people feel the pain, and therefore it will impact people's resilience across the whole team. So it's a really good point about losing people. And also reputation. If you lots of people leave, you start saying, "What a company that? What's not a place I want to work for?" Thank you very much. Particularly younger people will look for companies that actually are supportive and develop them and encourage resilience. That's really important point. So thanks for that, Stuart. Right. So what else? What happened? Of course, the opposite of that. So what we've got here is, and I've worked unfortunately with companies that haven't been the most. They look on paper, they say the right thing, the corporate, social reports and things like that. But actually, when you look around and think, does this, if results about making those positive and straight, supportive, what happens if you get it wrong? And this comes from the boardroom downwards. And this is important that what you're going to get if you're not supporting people's resilience, um, then you're going to see a lack of engagement. And you mentioned about retention, Stuart. That's a good point. People lack of engagement, low morale. So it's almost presenteeism starts to occur. Where now I meant to put that on the list as well. Link those two together. But you've got people turning up, but the lights are on, but there's no one at home. And actually, what happens is you just get this lower productivity, decreased quality, and it's all interlinked on the list I've particularly mentioned. Um, the sort of the other thing I would probably, accidents and error rates and absences, they will go up, and that's in the list as well. And you just get a real downward trend and people start leaving, and there's gaps, and actually reputation wise they end up with lowering your share price of the company. So it's a huge cost not getting this right. And also it's making sure that we put support programs in place. So organized development we need to make sure that they're supporting that. But without resilience, it really can lead to a really dysfunctional, unproductive, sick company. And that's that. You think, well, it's almost like stress, Robert. Well, resilience really today is we're looking at that particular trait as resilience. Without resilience, it can lead to stress, and it can lead to anxiety, it can lead to depression. So it's all this is a spectrum. But being resilient is really a skill that you can actually pick up. If you stop being resilient, it does impact the company in many, many ways. Again, I'll pause if there's anything people want to comment or add to that list, or anything they've observed if they've worked for a company that's not particularly resilient or supportive.
I just wanted to make a point, and it's not sort of adding to this list, but it's just focusing on that presenteeism cost for organizations. And I don't think organizations fully understand sort of that hidden cost to their business. And we've been talking about it for many years to do with musculoskeletal disorders and how it distracts us and takes us away from our work. But I've read stuff that says if presenteeism costs for organizations can be 4 to 7 times greater than absenteeism costs. So if you have a look at your absenteeism costs and sort of see how much that is costing the business, then you can times that by 4 to 7 times, and that will be your presenteeism cost. So that hidden cost to organizations. So again, if you invest in this, then there is going to be that payback.
Absolutely, Stuart. I mean, it's almost like the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? You see above the sea level, you can see the iceberg. That's the sickness. Below it, there's all this stuff that's affecting presenteeism, like morale, engagement. There's a huge. The presenteeism is a huge issue, and that's why companies spend a lot of money doing engagement surveys. However, what they need to do is make sure that they act on those engagements. I see plenty of companies doing engagement surveys, but not have an action plan or improvement plan. And all these being engaged is actually part of being resilient. It's all interlinked. Whatever words we put on that, but it's also making sure that we're talking about people who aren't supported. If people have an adverse event or a shock, then have we got things in place? So organizers without resilience often don't have things like, it's not on this list, but I'll add to it, things like proper support, proper occupational health, EAPs, all the kind of social support programs, mentoring, feedback sessions. Those are lacking when you've not got a resilient company, because people need to be supported when things go wrong. And maybe we'll talk about that towards the end. But what can we do to improve resilience? It kind of starts with you. You can be the most resilient person, but you end up working for a toxic company, your resilience will actually be very much challenged, and often it's unlikely they'll stay. Let's be honest. So here's a couple of more a kind of way of thinking about that. And we're talking about change, because most of the things that impact is, we talked about all these things that happen in the world, like redundancies, Ukraine and Russia, and these are changes happening in the world. Some within our control and some are not. But this is really interesting, this, when you think about change to us as people. So if you think about and that impact on your resilience. So let's look at the blue, predictable, those changes that are predictable. Well, we all grow up, we all become adolescents. And the reason adolescence is that's when you see some more significant changes in us as human beings. We also leave home. Some people go back leaving home because of financial crisis, of course, but that's a predictable kind of pattern that most people expect people to do. They grow up and they leave home to go out on their own independence and adventures. And then some people have a first relationship, whatever that is. And that's, again, most people have that need for human connection, and sometimes that's a form of a relationship. Again, it's fairly predictable. What's not as predictable is the next one, which is the unpredictable. This is where you might have you might think, well, one if two managers can end up divorced. So you think, well, is it predictable? But actually, when people settle down, and an end of relationship isn't foreseeable, and sometimes it's a complete shock, mainly because of whatever someone else's behaviour, etc. End of relationship is a particularly massive change for some people. Ill health, we know we're born and we die, and that's in that gap. There's periods of ill health we'll suffer, but we don't know when that's going to be. Sometimes some of it are predicted depending on your lifestyle, of course, but generally we don't know when we're going to become ill, as such. And again, it's a massive change for us, depending on what that illness is, mental, physical, etc. Then there's general loss. Now that could be loss of a job, role, relationship, a parent, child, whatever it is. Bereavement, generally, I'm really talking about is that we know that might happen, we don't know when, so that's unpredictable. Here and those kind of, and I'll wrap up when let's look at the voluntary ones then. The predictable and voluntary. Moving house. We choose to move house. It may be because there's a necessary requirements of changing job, or it's linked, but we choose generally to change our job. It might be promotion, it might be for a sideline move, different experience, different role. And then sometimes we choose to leave our role, voluntarily, through redundancy, or whatever it is. But voluntary redundancy is you're often a choice in, I want to leave, and thank you for my package, I'm off somewhere else. So those again are voluntary. Involuntary is when there's redundancies, where you particularly didn't want to lose your job, where you particularly didn't want to change your role. These are things that the company are asking you to do, and you've got a choice whether you do it, but generally it's involuntary. And then new ways of working. We all like change or don't like change imposed upon us, but when it's imposed on us, a new way of working, actually sometimes it can cause real issues. So the predictable in the blue has little impact on your resilience because it's usually within your control and it's predictable. But what the unpredictable, involuntary ones have a huge impact on your resilience. So what I'm saying here is that they're all four probably going to happen in your life. We don't often plan for our unpredictable or involuntary ones. And I think what we're saying here is that we probably need to start thinking about that, making sure we're equipped, pick up some skills, pick up some tips. So when we know when the big wave is coming, that we're actually more equipped to deal with it. And that's the point of this model, really, is that people that struggle end up with stress, end up with anxiety, depression, are probably ones that haven't really planned, that haven't really managed and thought about much the unpredictable, the involuntary changes that severely impact your resilience. Again, I'll just pause on there if there's anything people want to add or comment.
While we're waiting, I can certainly see myself in those unpredictable and involuntary sort of boxes, over the looking back over the years. And, as we grow old, as you say, we do end up experiencing loss, ill health as we age, and sort of the body starts to wear out. So, and also particularly myself, I like structure. So when new ways of working start kicking in, then again, and it's all these sort of in your mind, you're sort of what if, and your mind starts sort of taking over. So then you divert that energy to managing the what ifs and not actually managing the day-to-day tasks that you should be focusing on.
That's absolutely. And we tend to, and I could be including this, sometimes put your head in the sand and put your fingers in your ears and go, let's hope it doesn't happen. But actually, what I'm saying, it's not being doom mongering. It's saying, what if this happens? Or have I got? Is there anything I need to sort of think about in the future? If this did happen, have I got the necessary skills, resources to deal with it? Resilient people plan for the unpredictable involuntary is what I really want to say. They don't dwell on it, but it's in their mindset. So that's what makes the difference, really. What
Yeah, and I
about
was just going to
this? You
say,
might
I
have come
just
across.
try and forget about it and think, actually, you know, I have confidence in myself that
Yeah.
whatever's going to happen, I'm going to be able to deal with it.
Absolutely, Stuart. I mean, this is a model going back up here by Steve Williams, and you might have seen different traits of this. But if I just explain it from a point of view, from a resilience point of view, because it's a real pressure performance curve. So obviously on the left hand side, vertical axis performance, and the bottom horizontal axis is performance. If we're bored, generally bored, where the performance and pressure is kind of low, that isn't really generally good for resilience, because what we're doing, we're not being stretched, developed, whatever. We're not probably being at our best. That will impact. So people if they're redundant or if they lose their job, whatever, then actually that has a massive impact on their personal resilience in terms of coping skills. Generally comfortable, being in comfort zone is pretty good for resilience. As long as we don't stay in comfort too long, we slip back into bored. So comfort's a good place to be, but resilient people, I'm going to throw this in, that love to be stretched. They're not just take the status quo. They want to say, looking for the next thing. They generally want to be stretched, developed, and actually resilient people are pretty good at going into strain because they've planned and they've got the resources to go into strain. However, no matter how perfect they are in terms of their all their skills and coping skills, it's not great to be in strain. And what resilient people probably do quicker is identify when they're in strain and get support resources and feed that back so they come out of strain pretty quickly. If you're not less resilient people, will probably slip down into strain and into crisis more and not say anything. So there we go, is the difference between a performance and pressure. Resilient people are generally good at managing these types of issues in terms of, their general development and strain. Very rarely will they go into crisis without identifying it pretty early. That's the difference between a kind of, what resilient people can tend to do. And it's good for everyone to be a bit more resilient, to sort of speak up and identify when we monitor our level of pressure performance. Generally, they are better at doing it, and people at resilient teams talk about this. Maybe do daily, weekly, monthly checks to make sure their team and themselves are on where they are on the pressure performance curve. They actively monitor it to make sure they're not harmed by it. So that's the difference between a resilient person, team, organization, and those that don't do it. This is a model based on Roberts and Cooper. They did obviously a team of especially psychologists, and they very kind of go into this in a lot more detail. But I just want to pick out one, a simple kind of way of looking at this one. So there's generally two types of people, and make it simple. There's people, we mentioned the realistic optimism, resilient people. This takes it a different way. So optimistic thinking. Let's look at temporary ones. They say this is temporary. So the resilient person will say this will fade and we'll get back to normal soon. So their thinking is that everything's kind of, tends to be temporary, and actually things move on. What will happen next year? What will happen this year? They see it. They see coming out of that pretty soon, and go for the status quo. Pessimistic thinking and people probably less resilient. This will, we'll never get back to normal, and it will remain the same. It's all awful, and it will stay the same permanently. So they see the difference in optimistic thinking, pessimistic thinking in terms of temporary and permanency. The other thing they'll do next is what they call specific. Being specific. There are still some good things in my life despite all that's going on, or what's going wrong. They're very good at actually making sure that they kind of put things in specifically. So if everything's going on, they say, well, look, this is going right, so let's focus on that. Of all the things, but if you're pessimistic thinking, then because of this crisis, you might say, because of this crisis, everything is going badly and brings no joy. It's absolutely awful. So what they'll say, they'll generalize, we'll come into the different forms of thinking, but this is very important to think about managing your own resilience. And then there's what they call external, internal. So an example of optimistic thinking externally is the reason this has happened is outside my control, and everyone is challenged in different ways. So it's actually this thing about what can I control, what I can't control. I mentioned the COVID example before, but actually, some of this stuff is outside the Ukraine crisis, but actually making sure that they say, well, we know it's going on. I am concerned about it. I'll do my whatever I need to do to support that and support my family in it. But actually, anything external has got less control over it. And actually, they identify that pretty quickly. They tend to focus on what's in their control than what's external. However, pessimistic thinking people will focus on internally. They'll say things like this always happen to me, and it's much worse for me than anybody else. It's the woe is me. It's always, everything's kind of personal, internal, and therefore it's really what really harmful actually in that sense, thinking like that. So what does that mean? So the optimistic thinking kind of creates more persistence. It's things, they look at things temporary, specifically, externally, whereas pessimistic thinking really becomes permanent, everything, and also internally leads to helplessness. So the difference being resilient people tend to be persistent, non-resilient people tend to be a little bit more helpless and therefore not as clear in their thinking patterns. So that's a very, an overview of those two particular ways of thinking. Let me go into some things that you might have heard a little bit more. And the other thing, I kind of want to say, this is cognitive faulty thinking, really. This really affects our cognitive ability. So let's look at some examples. Again, try and avoid this where possible. I know we're not saying about being perfect, but we all tend to do these at times. But again, to improve your own resilience, try to think about these. So all or nothing thinking, challenge yourself on that one. It's all going wrong, and this is that. It's not specific, is it? All or nothing thinking is it all goes wrong and nothing will goes right. Or all managers are all managers cause stress, and actually, well, some might not do. So that's the all or nothing thinking. Overgeneralization is really a similar thing, but it's really making sure, they generalize everything very much so. So, they might say a political party are always saying this. Well, sometimes they don't. So generalizing something that you try and avoid because actually it helps, there are specific issues where they might not generalize, there might be some specific issues in there. Next one is what they call catastrophizing. The old dad's army, we're all doomed. So an example would be your manager might say, can we all meet in my office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock? And what will happen is that some people go, oh, that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. We haven't had any feedback for a while. Whereas another part of the team might say, oh my God, we're all going to lose our jobs. Last time there was a meeting like this, there was a massive redundancy in the team. So without knowing what's going on, the catastrophe, it's all going to be terrible, which is linked to jumping to conclusions. It might say, if we do this, well, this is bound to happen. So example being probably is, we'll hit our targets at the end of the year, but we never get a pay rise or we don't get recognised for that. So it's almost like jumping to conclusions, seeing the future before you've actually got there. Mind reading is interesting, and I think we sometimes do this. Mind reading is, I know what my manager's thinking, example. They tend to always do this, or I know what they're thinking. Well, you don't. And they don't, they kind of just think they might, reading someone's mind is actually often not many people can do it if at all. But try not to do that. So wait for the evidence and wait for the specificness that comes out of that. And finally, another example is tunnel vision. My way or the highway. This is what we need to do. Forget about everything else, but this is what we need to do without gathering the data or the evidence to make sure that it might be the right or wrong decision. But tunnel vision is really something to be avoided because actually often you might not take perspective of other people and therefore it could be the wrong decision. So these are some interesting kind of things about thinking, the faulty thinking that people have, which affects how they behave. Now, resilient people tend to kind of avoid some of these things, or they're aware of it, even if they kind of do it, and try to kind of put controls in place or talk about it more to make sure that they're not doing it. because we all tend to fall into this. But the more resilient we are, there's less chance of us actually picking up on this kind of what they call faulty thinking patterns. Any comments, anything I've missed on there that you might want to add? Any thoughts? It's worth thinking about this faulty thinking because we all do it, and we all need to sort of just be aware of it so we can manage it. Okay, so what resilient people can do as well? Well, actually, they can what they call self-coaching. They have coaching, but things like they'll start to ask questions themselves, like, what interactions have I had with my team? Is there anything that needs improving? That questioning, constant questioning, making sure they're checking in with themselves and making sure they're doing the right things. And actually, do I feel I have the right support resource to help me right now? That's a common question that resilient people ask themselves. And I mentioned that resilient companies will have the right support programs, but again, making sure that they might have all these EAPs and it might be occupational health or whatever it is, but there might be something else, might be some developments that they might need that's outside of that. Here's an interesting question they might ask themselves: on a scale of 1 to 10, how is my personal resilience doing today? That really, I mean, we do audits on ourselves, we rate things, but if we actually said, let's get one, how is my person that's doing today or this week, even write it down, sometimes in a journal reflectiveness. If it's 10, fantastic. But if it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you're thinking, what is it that I'm doing that's not working for me right now? And now what support do I need to get out the scale? So this self-reflection is really important in terms of your resourcefulness. You could replace a little bit of resilience with resourcefulness, but actually we're using personal resilience as an example to get the resource that you need to become more resilient. And then the last one's pretty much clear about what do I need to do, advice. So those are some. There might be other questions you might want to ask yourself, but this period of reflection, period of thinking time, and actually what might be good for us to do for a manage our own resilience is put some time in the diary. It could be a Friday afternoon or a Monday morning, even say, what is it right now? Let's just have a think about how am I feeling right now, pressure performance curve, and what do I need in terms of support right now where I am with it. If I'm a low number and I'm low on the pressure performance curve, what is it I need to do this week to improve that? But make sure it happens. Put it in the diary. Make sure that this is really important time for you to develop yourself and stop and think and say, am I serving myself right now? And this is a fairly common model, but I want to come back to just to draw it up because this is really key. What resilient people kind of do in teams and organizations, they'll actually say, really, just to put it into a context, we need to focus our energies on what we can control and influence, without a doubt. And we mentioned some examples earlier about COVID and Ukraine and things. What can we do? What resilient people definitely do is really focus on that direct circle of control. They also do things in their circle of influence, and they'll work on that by getting other people on board, or the influencer, or writing papers or proposals to get some influence on that. But very rarely do you spend much time in that area of concern. Of course, they're concerned and caring, but actually, it's limited what they can do to impact those circles of concern. And the people that are less resilient focus a lot more on the circle of concern than the circle of control. That's what's the big find on developing personal resilience is. And at the bottom, what we can't control or influence, we need to let go of. And this thing carrying worries and ruminations around the head, worrying about things we can't control, it's a complete waste of energy. And actually, this is what coaching is good for, is actually making sure you are working in your circle of control. It's much healthier, and in fact, it really develops your resilience if you can do that more and more. Some top tips to kind of just real make it practical. Here, you can obviously go away and read some of this. I'm just going to list them really, but these are some really common evidence-based practices and processes you can build in. So first of all, keep a rational mindset. Don't mind read. Don't sort of over catastrophize. We talked about faulty thinking. Keep a rational mindset. Where is the evidence for that behavior? Where is the evidence for that? Keep a rational mind. It's not just you live your life on emotional requirements. It's evidence based practice. Keep them at it. If it's things going wrong, say, well, what's going right here? What is the evidence for this going wrong? Get a mentor coach. I mentioned that. Really important. People don't do that. Sit and talk to more experienced people. You actually, their resilience brushes off on you. They've learned their resilience. So there's no harm in asking people to share what they do that's right. And the coach will challenge you to make sure you are focused on the areas of your own control and make sure that you have goals to develop. Know your own blind spots. And that's why I'm sharing the faulty thinking ones. That's definitely lots of people's blind spots. But if you're aware of it, you can actually stop yourself and sometimes say, well, okay, that I'm kind of doing this. I need to sort of change that a little bit. And actually I need to catch myself out, maybe catch myself doing it right and reward myself for it. Ask for support when needed. We get caught up in this kind of like I'm invincible, I'm too important to ask for help. Even the most senior leaders know when they need support. And it might be from colleagues, it might be from friends, it might be from counsellors, psychologists, but it doesn't matter who you ask, as long as you need to ask someone that's relevant for your particular requirement. Focus on what you can control. I mentioned that clearly one. I know I majored on that, so I won't spend any more time on that. But most people find that I find that people who really struggle at work, and particularly levels of pressure and stress, is the resilience is pretty low because they focus on what they're not controlling over. They're not controlling. So that's some really important point. Manage pressure to avoid stress. Find out what is on you. Use your pressure performance curve that I've shared with you today to say, where am I right now? And what do I need to do to kind of get up the curve or back down the curve? Keep doing what's working for you in terms of healthy habits. Have breaks. Have go for lunch with your colleagues. Keep looking after yourself in that sense, but keep doing those things. When your resilience is challenged, you tend to your health tends to suffer, so you tend to fall into bad habits and panic mode. Live in the present moment. Mindfulness is I'm a big fan of, but not everyone's makes their cup of tea. But being present, saying right now we're doing this. They're not worrying about the future and they're not regretting the past. They're very present. There's lots of techniques you can do to become more present and mindful in your day-to-day lives. Really important that you take time out to recovery. For recovery, and that might mean between setting breaks in meetings, you might say, well, let's have a 45-minute meeting. Let's not have an hour. And because what an hour causes is that you end up finishing late, rushing to your next meeting, and actually impacts and causes a lot of pressure for you. And we set our own timescales, we set our own diaries. So why are we causing ourselves to be less resilient? And then finally, one of the top tips is helping others. If you see people that are less resilient and you've got some ideas, support, then that will help your own resilience by helping others. So it's important that you by giving something your time or its resource, whatever it is, actually helps your own resilience. So that will be my top 10 tips. There's lots of evidence to support that. And give it a go is what I would say. Maybe pick one or two that you want to develop over the next week or so. Even if it's just a pressure performance curve or it's the focus on control. Don't take on too many actions, but to start to think about how you can develop your own personal resilience for yourself, your team, and actually your company. So, Stuart, I'm bang on time. I'll be thankful to tell you. So I'll just kind of just happy to take any more thoughts, questions, reflections from anybody in the meeting today.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, Robert. That was great. And we'll just sort of see if any questions do come through. But that last slide and pretty much the whole of the webinar, I can see, looking back at my life over, the last 5 or 10 years, things that were, I've had to sort of put in mechanisms, self-control to sort of manage my resilience and improve my energy levels, because I certainly found years ago that actually trying to manage stress and anxiety takes a whole lot of energy out of you, and then you end up in that catch-22. It's difficult to try and get out. So one of the big things I do try and do is to make time for myself to do that recovery and look at how I do my tasks as well. So you look at that stress curve. So I try and bring myself back into that comfort zone at times, because that's where I can sort of re-energize, recharge my batteries a little bit more. So that was great. But I do have one question or one thought, and it's so I've got teenage daughters. We hear a lot on the news about the generation, the younger generation, and how they're not as, or they appear to be not as resilient as the older generations. Do you have any thoughts on that, Robert?
Yeah, well, sure. I too have my daughter in early 20s, and she does suffer from anxiety. In fact, at times she worries about things that she's way out of her control. So here's my honest thought about this. I get a bit sad when I see the press and social media say the snowflake society. So I don't like that for a start. I think they're different. I think it's just different. So the whole world of social media actually doesn't help these things, and I see sad to see young children impacting their own personal lives by having images of being perfect and all that pressure and cyberbullying, all that kind of. I mean, I grew up, and when I was there, I didn't have that sort of stuff. I used to go on, play with mates, and go out. Now it's 24/7 criticism, putting your phone, social media, all you've got to look like this. You've got to. So I think it's just different. But what they are resilient for, and the younger generation are more resilient in, they're actually more driven in terms of their careers. They don't worry about change. They might have 1 or 2 years in somewhere else, move on, much more flexible. But I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't think there's a good or bad how old you get. I think they are different. And I think an example of social media is one example that are different in this generation. It is a fast-paced moving culture, and there's lots more change these days than certainly I was when I was younger and doing the career. And there's very few people have 30, 40-year careers now. So that would be my just a quick reflection on that, Stuart, is that there's no wrong and right in a generation for me. I think that for me it's just they have different pressures and they have different levels of personal resilience. That's what I would sort of my comment be. But I'm open to debate if anyone has a different view.
I'd say my own thoughts on this is, as you say, it's technology, apps,
Yeah,
social media, or just anything that you find on a tablet or a smartphone in terms of an app. So, my daughters, they do social media. They're on the usual platforms, but they also have the news apps. So they get news headlines coming through. Now, I remember when I was their age, I didn't really care about the news. I just wanted to go out, climb trees, go on my bicycle, that sort of stuff. What was happening in the world, I didn't really care about too much. But now they're seeing
well,
all these information pop up, and I had a conversation with my daughters at the start of the Ukraine war, when there was all that talk about Putin and sort of his nuclear arsenal, and that kind of created some anxiety for my daughters.
yeah,
And so they haven't experienced that before, so that's probably where that anxiety comes from. But
yeah,
actually, for the older generation, we have gone through sort of similar scenarios. Things repeat
yeah.
themselves over years. So, maybe we're just older generation has sort of been there, done that, sort of built up the resilience to deal with that. Whereas the younger generation, being exposed to it younger, they haven't got that sort of adult mind to try and build that resilience at that age. And they're just being exposed to it a lot earlier, maybe.
Yeah, and I think go back to certain control. I wasn't saying if say focus on what you control is actually better your resilience, but actually younger people try and influence the outer control. So the environment, for example, they're much more active in wanting to make the world a better place. When I was young, we were much more accepted, just focused on my little bit. They're much more globally thinking than certainly. So there's good and bad, I think. Depending on how you protest and everything, of course. But yeah, they're a different generation, and I think there's pros and cons of everything. And I think we should take the good and from both and support each other. That's what I would say on that one.
As parents, we should be the coaches. We should be sort of the
Yeah,
mentors to say, actually, this is going to be okay. Try and, you can't control it. So park it to one side and focus on what you can control.
absolutely.
Okay. Okay, well, we're sort of almost coming to the time. Haven't had any questions through, so I'm assuming everything we've covered today, or you've covered today, Robert, has been clear and concise, and sort of, there's lots of tips there that have come through from that. So thank you again, Robert. So what I think we'll do now is we'll just finish off for the webinar. So We've got our third in this series of these webinars being delivered, which is looking at managing stress at work, and that's being delivered on Thursday, the 15th of June at 10 a.m. So we hope you can join us for that again, just to sort of look at that. I think there's no more questions coming through. So I think what we'll do is we'll close the webinar for today. Thank you for everyone for attending today, and I hope we can see you again on the 15th of June, just to sort of wrap up the series of 3. If you missed the first one, then that's available on our website on the demand section of our website. So please have a look at the first one if you missed it. But I think all that's to say now is thank you, Robert, for a brilliant webinar. Thank you for everyone who's attending, and we both hope to see you on the 15th of June. Okay, many thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.